Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here today with a very special guest, Steven Pinker. We're here to talk about his book. It's a very long title. It's When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, colon, right? That's the grammar. Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life. Steven, how are you?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm honored that you're here. So the first thing I want to ask you, there's something in your book called the Aumann theorem. Is that how you pronounce it?
Aumann, yeah.
Aumann. Okay. So I was I'm reading the book, and it's mostly fascinating. This one thing, it says why we can't just agree to disagree. And the theorem says something along the lines of, if we start with the same priors and we have access to the same information, we cannot agree to disagree. For rational agents, we must arrive at the same conclusion, correct? Or estimation of probability of events or whatever. And I was looking at this and I was like, why is this surprising? I mean, what else is there besides priors and evidence, right? So why do people kind of make it make sense to me?
Yeah, so this is a famous theorem, at least famous among the rationality community, but also among the people who study this concept that the book is based on, namely common knowledge, which says if two rational agents have the same priors and their posteriors are common knowledge, those posteriors must be the same. So priors meaning understanding of the world before looking at the evidence. Posteriors mean assessment of the degree of credence you should have in a hypothesis after looking at the evidence. These terms are taken from Bayes' theorem. And what is surprising about it, let me just zoom out for a second. So what might be reasonable about it, despite the little bit of shock in the idea that you can't agree to disagree, because agreeing to disagree sounds like civil discourse, rational, reasonable agents. The reason that your intuition is that this doesn't shock you at all is that there's no reason why my information should be special just because it's mine. If we're ultimately in the search for objective reality and assuming you're rational, then any information that you have should be as valuable as any information that I have. That's your intuition as to why this is so reasonable that it shouldn't be shocking to anyone. But here's the twist, that the two agents don't have to show each other the evidence, only their posteriors. That is, we're trying to determine what was the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, or who shot JFK. We both have the same understanding of the world, so the same priors, but it's not like here is the trajectory of the bullet and the Zapruder film, and that's why I think it's 0.9 likely that Oswald acting alone killed Kennedy. It's just 0.9, period. And then you say 0.7. And I say, now here's the other surprise. Okay. I don't then say 0.8. I might say 0.5. And then you might say 0.95. And I say, 0.32. That is, the positions in the subsequent argument are a random walk, not meeting in the middle. And that until they converge, maybe even on the last step, after having zigzagged all over the place. So that's also unintuitive. Because
wait, let me understand. So are we sharing evidence, or we're just sharing our posterior probabilities?
We're just sharing our posterior probabilities. So
okay.
That's what makes the theorem unintuitive. Because if we're sharing evidence, you're right. I mean, unless one of us is dishonest, unless one of us is irrational, why shouldn't I make use of your evidence? I mean, evidence is evidence, and I shouldn't be proprietary. But by the same logic, the idea that reasonable people should meet in the middle, when you think about it, that's not all that reasonable, because why should the truth just happen to fall halfway in between the opinions of two guys? And also, if you were going to move in the direction of the other guy, you should shift your opinion on the first move exactly as far as the evidence compels you to shift it, not making grudging concessions like you're haggling over a price. Haggling over a price is not a rational way to assess the state of the world. I mean, it's a natural thing for humans to do, but this theorem is is about what is optimal, what optimal argumentation consists of. So so those two things about the theorem are surprising. Scott Aaronson, who first introduced me to the theorem, a theoretical computer scientist, said that there is a domain in which real human beings do act like the rational arguers in the Aumann theorem, and that is often mathematicians at a whiteboard struggling to ascertain the truth of some proposition will often switch sides, leapfrog over each other, passionately argue against what they were just passionately arguing for. And that random walk, as he said, what a rational argument should look like.
So when you say we don't, we shouldn't meet in the middle, couldn't this be? I mean, how does this relate to wisdom of crowds? So it's a sample size of one basically, and someone has another opinion. So why don't I just move towards them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have to think of what is the difference in the idealization of these rational knowers that differs between the wisdom of crowd situation and the Aumannian agree to disagree situation.
So this theorem does not require me to know anything about you other than your prior and your posterior. What do I know about and your rational?
Well, so yes, actually, so the posteriors have to be common knowledge, and that's what ties it to the theme of the book. That is, it wouldn't work if you peeked at my posterior and I peeked at your posterior. Each one has to know that the other knows that the other, so that I can have confidence that whatever your posterior is, and again, just for those who are unfamiliar with Bayesian lingo, that just means your assessment of the degree of credence we should have in a hypothesis on a scale of 0 to 1. So it has to be that you know that I know your posterior, so I can have confidence that your latest posterior takes into account everything I know, and having already taken into account everything you know, and so on. But our rationality also has to be common knowledge. That is, when I give my posterior, that's knowing that you know about my rationality. So that's another thing that has to be common knowledge. And it's common in most game theory scenarios that the rationality of the two players is common knowledge, together with the payoffs.
Okay, so I went from thinking this was trivial to thinking it's now endlessly fascinating. So I'm glad I was able to ask this question. So should I imagine this as like it's different steps? So step one, we have this common knowledge of our posteriors. Could it be that we're just rational and we did that from the start? Should I think of this as like steps, or we just kind of
It's a really good question, because his theorem by itself is not about steps. Although in a little kind of sidebar, he kind of plays out what the steps should look like. But the theorem is, you're right, it's in theory one shot. But if it were played out, then it would be a random walk. That is, you could not predict where someone will move based on what he did previously, because if he was going to move that way, why didn't he already move that way?
So it is kind of, I guess it's like you could think of it as like a game theory tree, where you could see 3 steps ahead and then you end up doing the thing that you're at.
Right. Not in his original theorem, but in an extrapolation by another mathematician, Giannakopoulos.
Okay.
And one that Aumann kind of hinted at. He noted, by the way, in this, it's just a 3-page paper. He said the results are not immediately, it's not immediately intuitive. But the proof is trivial once you.
Interesting. Okay, so you have to look, because I read the book and I misunderstood it. Is it one of those things where like the math really really helps to get into it?
Yes.
Okay,
that's right.
It's very hard.
And I stepped through a concrete example with the help of Aumann, who himself was at age of 93, has not lost a step, and he kind of helped me explain it.
That's excellent. So, okay, So, moving on. So regarding the laughter, I find this endlessly fascinating, because I think it's like an under theorized part of social life. I mean, it's so normal. I mean, we meet, you just know whether people are laughing or not laughing. You know, we're friends or whether we're not friends, or like flirting. It's such a huge portion of everyday life. And you talk about humor and comedy, which I think is just very timely. I'm sure you're getting probably a lot of questions on comedians and all this. It's also so the idea of the book is like it create common knowledge. You laugh at a dictator, like it's kind of like emperor's no clothes. It's like the kid, it's everyone's laughing. Also, I think there's a little bit less emphasis on the book about laughter as kind of a bonding experience, in the sense that it's like there's just endless amount of background knowledge you have to know, right? And so it's kind of like that. It brings people together, but that's also like threatening. So these things are not different things, but they're aspects of the same social system.
That's exactly right. So in the book, I talk about humor as a human counter-dominance tactic. So a lot of animals that sort themselves into dominance hierarchies also have ways of challenging it. And we humans have various hierarchies for prestige and status and sheer dominance, bullying, but also deference, preeminence, and so on. And so humor, I think, almost always there's some butt of a joke, someone whose dignity has been taken down a couple of notches.
Mhm.
But that can be used aggressively, either to keep from the top, keep those in the bottom on the bottom, from those lower down to try to take those in the top down a few notches. But but you're right, it could also be used convivially, and a lot of laughter is self-deprecatory comments or gentle teasing, where the other people point out each other's minor foibles.
Yeah.
And I think what's going on there is that a big theme of the book is that human relationships fall into a small number of general types. This is an idea that I took from the UCLA anthropologist Alan Fisk, based on his worldwide survey of cultures. We suggest that natural human relationships really fall into three kinds. There's a kind of communality, the kind of relationship where no one counts, everyone gives and takes freely. We're kind of melded into one bonded unit. That's the kind of relationship we have with our family, with our spouse or lovers, our close friends, teammates, clans that try to act like big families. Then there is a hierarchy, authority ranking, and that's our various dominance hierarchies. And the third one is kind of transactional, quid pro quo, divide things up into equal shares. There's probably a fourth type of relationship that Fisk calls market pricing, and that's literally there are prices, there's interest, there's futures, all the contractual things. Although he, in one footnote, says this may be part of a larger set of relationships that he calls rational legal, taking the term from Max Weber, which is all the apparatus of a modern society where how we relate is fixed by rules. The HR department, the bylaws, where it's just stipulated. And because this is so unnatural, it's just a feature of modernity, I kind of shunt it off to the side. So of the three natural kinds of relationships, friends are in a communal relationship, but there's always the danger that you could kind of slip out of that it would weaken, because no two people are alike in all their qualities. Naturally, some people are might be better looking or smarter or richer or more powerful. But that's not what a friendship should be about. Friendship should be about the fiction of complete equality and egalitarianism. And so a lot of the humor that's used convivially, I think, is to reinforce the idea we are friends. No one's better than anyone else. And so by gently teasing a friend, teasing yourself, if you're a dad, making fun of yourself as a hapless, bumbling
kids
dad.
love beating me up. It's amazing how 5 months old, before they know anything, they know beating up dad is funny. It's really amazing.
Isn't that true? Yeah, and dad goes along with it just fine. At least in a modern, not so patriarchal culture.
Yeah, it can be a threat in some cultures. Yeah, I can imagine that.
But so I think the laughter in social gatherings is constantly making common knowledge. And here's just to fill in another couple of points in the argument. So laughter is one of several signals, I suggest, that are common knowledge generators. That is, it's not a one-way signaling, but it's crucially, you know that the recipient knows that you know that the recipient knows. So in laughter, you know that you're laughing because it interrupts your breathing, and the other person can hear it. They ha ha ha. Blushing, you feel the heat from inside your cheeks at the same time as you know that someone is seeing the reddening from the outside.
Right.
In tears, you're seeing the world through a scrim of tears at the same time as the perceiver sees the glistening or the trickling. And eye contact, you're looking at the part of the person that's looking at the part of you, that's looking at the part of them, that's looking at the part of you. And so I talk about these four displays as common knowledge generators. In the case of laughter, I think what you're doing is you're taking what was private knowledge, namely everyone knew it, and you're making it common knowledge. Now everyone knows that everyone knows it. In the case of laughter, it's common knowledge of some infirmity, some indignity, some weakness, some mishap, either aggressively or convivially. And I cite the work of one. You're right that it is Actually, it's not so much that it's under-theorized, because there are a bunch of fairly unconvincing theories of humor, Freud and Henri Bergson, but none of them are based on actually seeing what makes people laugh. So a guy who just died a couple of years ago, an ethologist named Robert Provine, so he actually did it. He went out into social settings with a microphone, or he hired students to just, every time they heard someone laugh, write down what made them laugh. And what he found was the vast majority of laughter is not in response to anything that we'd find funny out of context. He said, life is the most badly scripted situation comedy ever. Typical laugh lines are things like, "What do you mean by that?"
Yeah.
Or "I'll see you later."
Yeah.
Or "You've got to be kidding."
Right.
As we are laughing right now.
Exactly.
That's what laughter is. So a joke is, I think, actually a pretty unnatural trigger for laughing. It's, I liken it to cheesecake. We didn't evolve a taste for cheesecake because there's cheesecake in the natural world. Cheesecake is an artificial concentrating and purifying of things that in weaker natural doses give us a little bit of pleasure. And so we kind of jam it into one big kapow.
Right.
And humor and jokes. And very few people can actually write good jokes, or even tell jokes well.
Right.
Is, I think, a supernormal exaggeration of the itty bits of enjoyment we get over real laughter in social settings, which are just minor indignities and breaches of decorum.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me think of people laughing in everyday situations. Like sometimes you'll see a woman and she'll say, what do you like about this guy? And she'll say, he makes me laugh. And then you look at the guy and it's like, he's not exactly Seinfeld or Larry David or something like that. And I just always figured like women laugh when they like a guy because look, status, whatever. And then they think that the humor itself is kind of what's making them attracted.
No, that's right. And in surveys of what people look for in a mate, women often both rank sense of humor high. From the guy's point of view, it means she laughs at my jokes.
Yes. She gets it, yeah.
But anyway, also just to just connect to another point that you made in the question, humor is a good assay for the other person's background assumptions. That is, if they say something and you both laugh, you're both saying, we both knew that all along. We're now bringing it out into the open. We're making it common knowledge. But our private knowledge prior to the joke must have been aligned for us to laugh once it's made common knowledge.
Yeah.
And indeed, and studies have shown that a common sense of humor is a good predictor of relationship success.
Yeah. I think about sometimes in politics where people say this left-wing comedian is not funny. And they'll say, of course they think the right-wing comedian is not funny. And it's like, well, the background assumptions you have are wrong, are different, right? So they think this party is more corrupt and you think the other party is more corrupt. So of course you're going to laugh at different things.
Right. And how many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's not funny.
Actually, it's funny because I think we're not social justice warriors. Exactly. I think this demonstrates
there you go.
The point.
See, and to laugh at that, it would show that there is some impatience with hardcore radical feminism.
Yeah. Have you ever thought? So I listen to podcasts sometimes, and I wish somebody would do this research. That it's like one of those things I would do if I lived 1,000 years. And I would think I would listen, and I would listen to the kinds of humor, like the study you were talking about before. But I realized that different kind of podcasts have different kinds of humor. They laugh at different things. So I listened to Sam Harris, for example, a lot of self-deprecating humor. Sam does that a lot. There's some podcasts I listen to where they're always making fun of the other side. And I'm kind of very interested. Sam Harris will talk about, I don't know, Trump supporters and how he disagrees with them. There's very little like laughing at them, or maybe it's just, a little bit of, the crazy thing. And some podcasts are just like, well, the left is crazy. We're laughing at this social justice warrior or this crazy person or whatever. And I wish somebody would, first of all, document this kind of intuition that I have and then try to theorize about it because, there's something going on there that we don't understand.
Yeah, interesting. And that conveys or reinforces an impression as to whether there's a sense of conviviality and all being on the same page and all being in a kind of community of friends, or whether it's war.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good way to judge political movements. If they're always laughing at the other side, they'll do terrible things when in power. If they're self-deprecating, they'll limit themselves.
Yes. And some politicians were some presidents were actually pretty good at self-deprecating humor, including George W. Bush.
Yeah.
who I saw at a press conference. He says, I've there are rumors going around that I'm just a puppet and take orders from Dick Cheney.
Mm.
And here's what I have to say about that. And he looks toward Dick Cheney in the audience. And he says, Dick, what do I have to say about that?
Yeah. He was good, right? He was good at that.
And so, of course, the other message is that it's a kind of the equivalent of humble bragging. That is, if you're confident enough that you could make a joke at your own expense, it means you're not acknowledging that you're not confessing to the weakness.
Yeah. Lincoln was famous for this, and accounts of Lincoln. And he's always supposedly making fun of the way he looked. So somebody called him two-faced, and he said, "You think if I was two-faced, I would be wearing the one I have right now?" And he didn't look that ugly to me, but I don't know. I guess if you're president, that, it's kind of like, I guess self-deprecating makes more sense when you're like higher status than someone. And this would be work as a president, or would work within a social circle. Yeah. Does Trump do this? Does Trump do
No, Trump is notoriously thin-skinned.
Yes,
I mean, he will
exactly.
not. He is the opposite of self-deprecating.
Yeah.
It's to his enemies, it's just a sign of how he has the wrong temperament to be president.
But he does this thing though. He does point out his own flaws once in a while. So sometimes he'll say, "Well, this poll had a good result for me. That's why I'm talking about it. If it had a bad result, I wouldn't talk about it." Yeah. And that's kind of self-deprecating. He's saying, he's saying, "I don't care about truth," but it's kind of I don't know what to make of that. That's kind of like vice signaling in a way.
Yeah, well, which he has taken to a high art. Yes.
Yeah. This is fascinating. I think politics and humor could be a dissertation topic. I was reading the book. I was thinking about this idea of common knowledge and a common culture. So I was reading this. There's a philosopher from Yale named, I think, Dan Greco is his name, and he wrote a article basically saying we read the great books, so we have a common culture. It's not necessarily that like Plato is going to give you like the best insights into today's political questions or anything like that, but it's like there's just this set number of books that we're all going to read, and there's like a common culture. And I was thinking about how this is kind of there's something like psychologically pleasant about this. So I'm just old enough to remember when we had a common culture, really before the internet and before social media, right? And so in the 1990s, everyone would watch a Super Bowl. I guess the Super Bowl still is kind of this one of a kind event. But everyone would watch Seinfeld. Everyone would watch Friends.
60 Minutes.
Yeah, exactly. It's all on the decline. Just the biggest movie stars were bigger than anyone today. The biggest albums, the biggest TV shows, the late night comics. They just had the stature. And I was thinking to myself, like when people just feel like something is off, and they'll blame, immigration, or they'll blame like the other side. They feel like their culture is gone. And I kind of think that what they're missing is maybe we like kind of simulated what things were like in our hunter-gatherer, earlier period of time, where everyone just kind of knew everything. Hey, look, there's that funny guy we all know. There's that tree over there where the fruit always falls a certain way. We kind of simulated that with the mass media, and that was like psychologically kind of healthy for people. And now we're kind of the common cultural assumptions have kind of broken apart, and maybe this is why people feel crazy. Does that sound plausible to you?
Yeah, I think so. And the set of background assumptions that are common knowledge within a culture, sometimes called common ground. That's our the idiom that we use. It was probably an arc, because before there were mass media, before people were buying the same papers, let alone the rise of radio and television, I guess there'd be a similar education for everyone who actually had education, which was a much smaller percentage of the population if they all read the great books. Mm. And it did enable things like in rhetoric and oratory, people could make an allusion from Shakespeare or Plato or the Bible and expect everyone to know what they were talking about. I wonder if that reached a peak during the era of an artifactual situation when there were broadcast media, but not that many of them, just because of the bandwidth and how much it costs to have a network of transmitters. So we had the 3 networks in the United States, the BBC in Britain, and then that came apart. And it's true. I remember where you could make an allusion to a tagline from some ad, and you'd expect everyone would know what you're talking about. You still see that. A sign of age is that people my generation kind of still do that and expect
Yeah.
millennials and Gen Z
Yeah.
to know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like Avis. I try harder,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that means anything to anyone.
Yes, I'm old enough to remember that one. Yeah.
Sometimes people read about
Yeah.
the memes from an earlier generation, so learn about it one step removed.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, TiVo became a thing, and around kids don't know what even TiVo is. But when you could record, DVRs, you could record, and that's when people stopped watching commercials, right? And
Right.
And so there was like an exact moment around 2000, 2001. Now you buy your cable service and you could just record automatically, and people are cutting the cord for cable anyway and going to streaming. But yeah, we all used to actually have to sit through the commercials to watch anything.
Yes, and they were many taglines, stronger than dirt. And when cigarettes were advertised, each one of them had a slogan.
Yeah.
But yes, we've lost that, and then further fractionation with social media. Although a bit of a paradox is, even though social media don't generate common knowledge at the same scale that, say, network television did, because literally they're delivered in a personal feed determined by an algorithm, which means that the X post that you're looking at, for all you know, no one else is seeing it. On the other hand, because there are the virality generators, the retweet or repost buttons, the like buttons, anything you see could increase exponentially, which means that the whole world could be seeing it. And so you have the phenomenon of social media shaming mobs where people pile on, if not that they think that it's literally common knowledge nationwide, at least it's common knowledge within the kind of people that matter to them.
Yeah.
And so and I talk about social media shaming mobs in the book, how what I think is going on is that our norms exist as common knowledge. Why don't you insult a woman's appearance to her face? Why don't you tell ethnic jokes? Why don't you use the kind of stereotypes about gay people that were common when I was a kid? Well, it's not literally against the law, but everyone knows you don't do it. And how does that kind of levitate in midair with nothing but you don't do it because everyone knows you don't do it? And why does everyone know that? Well, because everyone knows that everyone knows you don't do it. So if that is violated in a public arena, that is, if the violation is common knowledge, then that threatens the norm, and people feel the urge to prop up the norm by punishing the violator also in a public arena. And so that's why you get the piling on. Just as in the past, actual criminal punishment was always done in public. You had the public hangings and public drawing and quartering and burning at the stake, stocks and pillories. The idea being to reinforce the norm, everyone has to see the person being punished and see everyone else see the person being punished. I think social media give us the opportunity to do that at low individual cost to each person, but everyone can now contribute to the commons.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it is a new kind of common knowledge. It's kind of a populist common knowledge because everyone kind of has an input. And I wonder if that creates a different kind of common knowledge than the top-down kind of cultural knowledge that was created once by book publishers and newspaper editors and so forth.
Yeah, it's we lived through a kind of happy accident that the certain channels of distribution, common knowledge generation, were so expensive and scarce that they naturally tended to kind of marry gatekeepers who had some commitment to objectivity and truth. Although that wasn't automatic.
Yeah.
When cheap newspapers were first available the second half of the 19th century, almost all news was fake news. There was news reports of babies born talking Latin and Martian civilizations and how political
you'll still find that in the third world, I think. Yeah,
I think that's right. And so the newspapers, the major newspapers, kind of got their act together. They agreed on certain standards like fact-checking and editing and publishing corrections and sourcing and so on. And they kind of became at least closer, more aligned to truth dissemination. They could get away with it because there were not that many of them, but also they had an incentive to do that because if you're trying to appeal to the whole country, you can't the truth is kind of handy because if there's some kind of story that favors one side while demonizing another, well, you're writing off half your audience. And you can't afford to do that if you're, say, NBC. And so you are pushed toward a common denominator, which tends to be the objective truth because it isn't anyone's truth.
Yeah.
Once that starts to fractionate, and so the common knowledge pool is not nationwide, but you can kind of custom design your own common knowledge pool, first with cable news networks like Fox, but then even more so with social media and blogs and so on, then you still have common knowledge within those communities, but less common knowledge nationwide.
Yeah. So do you think there's a way to try to regain it? Because from my perspective, like I find myself inherently rooting, like I think we're two kind of broken apart. Like I'm rooting for Kimmel and like Colbert. Like I want something to be bigger. I want the NFL to be relatively big. I hope CBS with Barry Weiss, does okay. Like, should we be like just rooting for the big institutions to at least give us something to hold on to in this kind of crazy times?
I am. First of all, because it tends to steer a little bit toward objectivity, just because there's only one reality and it's the same for everyone. Also, I think it does tend to push toward more universalist humanist values as opposed to just sectarian conflict. Because if you have to appeal to everyone, then you have to appeal to what everyone has in common. Things like, being affluent, being healthy, being, living long lives, having freedom, things that you can't claim for yourself without granting it to everyone else. Whereas if it's just a set of factions, each one can push for just what's good for them. So just as a silly little example, so the world's first global television broadcast, thanks to satellite, the entire world watching the same thing at the same time, was the Beatles. And what were they singing? All You Need Is Love. Now, I think that's not a coincidence. If you got for the first time this historic moment where the entire world is listening to you, you're not going to sing about some girlfriend that you're who broke up with you. You're going to have some message that embraces the whole world. And I think also the heyday of global institutions, the United Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it may have been in an age in which it was possible to have media that reached the whole world. Maybe not for good reasons, maybe just as a byproduct of the fact that they were so expensive and you could only have like one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I kind of think about there also could be a lowest common denominator kind of dynamic here, because I think that explains, I think the idea that there's only a few news stations, that explains why, they'd be maybe politically a little bit more moderate, although conservatives have been complaining about liberal bias in the media forever, but I think relative to most things, it was probably more moderate. But then, the concern for truth, I don't know, like, I think if you had, like, I think if one of the three broadcast networks in 1985 or 90 or something decided to go rogue and just do sensationalist crime stories or like scary stuff about foreigners and National Enquirer, like I think that would have been popular.
It could be. Maybe it was an unexplored niche.
Yeah.
That it has to also be said that it wasn't just the market forces of appealing to a wide audience. There also was some government pressure in the form of the fairness doctrine.
Right.
That is, if you featured proponent of one political party, you had to balance it with the same number of minutes given to the other side.
Right. And there's also, the, I think that it's partly just kind of elite norms. Like it's just a kind of cartel and you can't give people purely what they want. And in some cases that's a market failure. But in a case like this, it might actually be good.
Interesting.
So do you see this as like a kind of a skill that you can develop to know the common knowledge? Because I think like a lot of, like, I think about dating a lot because just it's such an important issue that like people are not kind of pairing up, and this seems to cause a lot of like societal strife. Is like just is like understanding how common knowledge works. Do you see this as like a skill that people tend to develop? And you're around young people a lot, and you have been for a few decades. Have you noticed any kind of change over time?
Yeah, so a lot of what we call social skill, tact, savoir-faire. Not being on the spectrum, or at least not being too far along the spectrum. All of this often consists of calibrating how much private knowledge you should make common knowledge and how much you should keep it out of common knowledge. Everyone knows that there's certain things that you think but that you don't say. If you don't point out someone's, speech impediment, call attention to the fact they're fat, even though, they might be fat and you can't not notice it, but you don't say it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things like that. Sometimes there are also propositions that have to be calibrated so that they are not so blatant that they change, they explode the nature of the relationship, but not so subtle that the other person doesn't catch your drift. And this is especially true in sexual propositions.
Yeah.
Like, the classic one, would you like to come up and see my etchings?
Yeah.
Or do you want to come up for Netflix and chill?
Yeah.
Now those have become such cliches
exactly.
that they no longer are indirect
Yeah.
because they are now synonyms. But do you want to come up for coffee at midnight? Why is that? Any grown up knows what that means. Why is that so much more socially comfortable than do you want to come up and have sex?
Yeah.
What I suggest, I have a whole chapter on that phenomenon called Weasel words. And this is actually how I got into the becoming interested in common knowledge, starting from my interest in language. Namely, why don't people just blurt out what they mean? Why is there so much shilly-shallying and beating around the bush and hoping that your hearer will catch your drift and read between the lines? Why don't we cut the crap and just say what we mean?
Yeah.
So sexual propositions are an example. Bribery, if let's say you're trying to, showing up at a restaurant without a reservation and you want to jump the queue by slipping the maitre d' a $20 bill. People in that situation don't say, if I give you $20, will you seat me immediately?
Yeah.
They say things like, I was wondering if you might have a cancellation.
Yeah.
Or is there any way to shorten my wait? Veiled threats. I give an example from The Sopranos of a member of the family approaches a guy and it says, I hear you're on the jury for the Soprano trial. It's an important civic responsibility that we should all take part in.
Right.
You've got a wife and kids. We know you'll do the right thing.
I love that. Yeah.
So anyway, here's my hypothesis, and I have done experiments that bear it out. That direct speech, blurting it out, generates common knowledge, and common knowledge is the basis of the kind of relationship you have. Going back to the beginning of our conversation where I mentioned there are three basic kinds of human relationships. Whereas even an obvious innuendo generates private knowledge, but avoids the common knowledge. So back in the dating situation, if he says, do you want to come up for coffee? And she says no, she knows she's turned down a sexual overture. But does she know that he knows that she knows?
Yeah.
She could think, well, maybe he thinks I'm dense,
Yeah.
and that he knows it, but he doesn't know for sure that I know it. And he could, maybe she could think maybe he thinks I'm naive, and he could think maybe she thinks I'm dense, that I didn't know that she knew, and so they can go back to being platonic friends, or say supervisor and supervisee. Likewise, in the case of the bribing the maitre d'. If you, there's no deniability of the bribe, but there's deniability that the other person knows that you know that it's a bribe. And so you can get back to the relationship of deference and authority that is appropriate for that circumstance. A maitre d' is not just a sales clerk that can be bought off with a transaction. It's his authority that's being challenged. And that authority can be maintained if the offer is rebuffed. Now, going back to your question about perfecting your social skill, honing your social savoir-faire. It has to be calibrated, because if it's too subtle, the person won't even know that they're getting the proposition at all. And that was the source of the Seinfeld episode called Coffee, where George is invited by his date up for coffee and says, "Oh no, it's too late. The caffeine will keep me up." And on the way out, kind of slaps his forehead. Says, coffee doesn't mean coffee. Coffee means sex.
Right.
So how blatant should your proposition be without becoming common knowledge, but the other person's radar can know that there's a proposition in the air? That's a lot of what goes into social skill. Or in the case of politeness, how not to be obsequious, oleaginous, but still respectful of the other person's feelings. And all of these things, I think, in having remembered awkward moments in adolescence, I think you do learn to perfect. Some of it is culture specific. There are cultures where people just get to the point right away. Others where there's got to be a lot of ritual and honorifics, And so you do have to learn what kind of culture you're in. And it also depends on the context, who you're talking about, what the resource is in question. If it's just passing the butter, it's different than requesting sex. And you've got to know the difference between
Yeah.
the resource. And I suspect that if you're spending all your time with screens and there isn't the um, real-time two-way feedback, including from the common knowledge generators of eye contact, little bits of laughter,
Yeah.
and so on, that you will be kind of stunted.
So going back to the situation, I wonder if this is the right way to think about these things. So going back to the situation where the man invites the woman up to look at his etchings, and the way you put it is she's thinking, well, maybe he thinks I'm naive, so on and so forth. They have an established common knowledge. Is it also possible we could look at it like the common knowledge? Like, imagine they're both very sophisticated people. Imagine they both read Steven Pinker's book, right? and they talked about it. And so they understand the concept of common knowledge, and they're both educated, sophisticated people. And it could have another way, but they still might go through this dance where he says, come up, and she just says no. And maybe they just maybe another way to put it is they have the common knowledge that he made a pass at her. She rejected him. But because they did it in this way, they went through this ritual, they both agreed to just pretend like it never happened. And then they can go back to their relationship.
No, I think that's exactly right. The thing is, can they pretend that it didn't happen while preserving their reputation for rationality? That is, if the pretense is absurd, they're kind of surrendering any claim to rationality. So I think there has to be enough of a hidden rationale.
Yeah.
So they could actually not even plausibly, but again, plausibly in terms of what the other person might think about what they think. And that, and indeed we did find in the studies that we did, one of them, we had people imagine that they were bribing a cop in a corrupt country where bribing cops is kind of routine, but they didn't know how routine. And they had to kind of pitch the level of directness from, if I give you, 100 rubles, will you let me go? To, gee, officer, I guess I'll have to pay for my mistake, varying in a continuum of bluntness. And what we actually had a simple mathematical model, thanks to my colleague Martin Novak, a mathematical biologist, on what is the optimal level of vagueness, depending on which can be actually determined pretty precisely based on the cost of the ticket, the cost of an arrest for bribery, and the percentage of honest versus dishonest cops in that district. But we found that people actually were pretty good optimizers, except that in the case where blunt speech was the optimal solution, there's just no reason to be circumspect. There's no penalty. 100% of the cops say are corrupt. And so you're just not going to get arrested no matter what. The optimal thing is just be as blunt as possible, because there's some chance of a George Costanza-like situation where if you're not blunt enough, it might go over their heads. But people were still more indirect than they had to be.
Yeah.
That is, there's just, at least in our culture, there's some kind of background radiation of politeness, indirectness, that where you don't blurt it out even when there's no penalty for it.
Yeah. I mean, but that's also consistent with the kind of people, there's just a norm. Like there's just a norm that you do not do this. Even it's beyond this kind of rationality thing, or he's going to turn you in, or he's not going to understand. Like going back again, the situation where the man is inviting the woman in, like they could have a conversation at the end of the night, and he could proposition her, she could say no, and they could say, okay, let's shake hands and pretend this never happened and go back to the way they could do that, right? And that would be kind of optimal from a communications perspective, right? But if they're sophisticated enough and they're rational enough, they might just understand that's the equivalent of this, and it might not necessitate some degree of, well, I'm not sure if she's sure, I'm sure. They might be sure. They might be really sophisticated people who spend all night talking about your new book, and they both really understand that they get this kind of thing.
No, I think that's right. And just about all of the kind of standard stereotype situations that I talk about in the book can have exceptions precisely because of this ability that the book is about, namely the fancy word is recursive mentalizing. More clearly, it's reading the mind of a mind reader, or as thinking thoughts about the other person's beliefs about your beliefs about their beliefs. We can do it up to a point. Our head starts to hurt if there are too many layers. But because we can do that, it means that any of these circumstances, at least we have the cognitive ability to zoom out, step back, and have an idea about that whole scenario.
Mhm.
And if someone else is doing it, we could even think about how they're doing it, and
Yeah.
and that's what makes human social life so interesting. And we because there always are ways in which you can strategize or reflect on or theorize what is happening. And that's why certain sophisticated art forms are about characters each trying to get inside each other's heads as they try to get inside each other's heads. Murder mysteries are a prime example. And comedies of manners, where mistaken identity plots,
Yeah.
all of these, we kind of exercise our faculty for getting inside each other's heads for play.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of remembering the Three's Company, that was kind of always the premise of that. A very funny show, probably before the times of most of the audience.
Well, and I actually, it's not a coincidence that I have a number of allusions to Curb Your Enthusiasm, to Seinfeld, to Friends, including an episode, a famous episode in Friends, which culminates in Phoebe saying to Joey, they don't know we know they know we know. Joey, you can't say anything. And he says, I couldn't even if I wanted to.
You know, it's funny. You used also a Curb Your Enthusiasm example from the book where I think it was a slightly different topic, but it was when Ted Danson donated some money and he called himself anonymous, but then Larry went crazy because everyone knew he was anonymous.
It leaked out, yes.
And I independently wrote an article using that exact same episode.
Oh, did you?
For Unheard, yes. I was talking about, it was kind of unrelated. I was talking about, it was about housing actually, but it was kind of a funny point, and I brought that in just because I thought that was such a funny, kind of clever episode that
it's ingenious. In fact, I introduced it in a discussion of two great Jewish thinkers, Maimonides and Larry David. Because my first exposure as a child to the concept of common knowledge and intermediate degrees of mutual knowledge came from something that every Jewish kid learns about in Sunday school, Maimonides' ladder of righteousness or ladder of charity, where he said, Maimonides was not exactly an effective altruist. That is, the righteousness of an act does not depend only on how many people benefit, but on the circumstances of giving. So he had 8 levels of charity. The most charitable, the most righteous was teach a man to fish and you'd feed him for a lifetime. And that's pretty obvious. Or give him a starter loan or go into partnership with him so he doesn't even need charity in the future. So, okay, that's uncontroversial. Then the next level down was a double-blind gift. You put money into a community chest, the poor person picks it out, neither knows the identity of the other. Then a notch below that is when the beneficiary is known to the donor, but not vice versa. So you leave a package of food or a package of money on the doorstep of a poor person in the dead of night, scamper away, they open the door the next morning, recover the gift, they don't know who left it there, but you know who you benefited. Then Maimonides thought of the converse situation, where the beneficiary knows the donor, but not vice versa. So he said the great sages would walk around with robes with coins in the back, and a poor person would come up behind them and pick the coins out. And so the beneficiary would know the donor, but not vice versa. That was one level worse. Then the worst of all was common knowledge. The rich person puts the money into the hands of the poor person. And so all this is about, I did some studies with some students on this. Our hypothesis was that people used charitable giving as a kind of assay or a biopsy into the person's inherent dispositional generosity. And in the case where there's lots of knowledge, in particular common knowledge, the donor could call in favor, or could cultivate a reputation. And therefore, he might even come out ahead by giving the gift. Whereas in the double-blind situation at the top of the hierarchy, there could be nothing in it for the donor. And so, therefore, anyone who's willing to give anonymously is showing that in his marrow, he's generous. He's not doing it for the brownie points or the possible payback. And so the humor in the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode is that Danson figured out a way to have it both ways, to get the reputation for the generosity and the anonymity. Paradoxically, although even in that case, what's crucial is it only works if it's private knowledge, if the identity. So there were whispers going around. Oh, did you hear Anonymous is Ted Danson? But if it was announced that Anonymous was Ted Danson, that would have nullified whatever reputational advantages he would have accrued.
Yeah. And I guess Larry's a little bit more sophisticated because Ted Danson doesn't just get up at a party and say, I am the donor, right? And that's exactly. But Larry David understands that that's pretty much what he's doing. He's just making plausible deniability.
If he did that would have negated the reputational advantage. It had to be private knowledge, but not common knowledge. So it's one of a number of examples where the distinction between everyone knowing something and everyone knowing that everyone knows something has huge emotional and social implications, which is why I wrote the book.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. I encourage everyone to read it. I wanted to ask you some questions too about your previous two books. Better Angels was the one before, right? And then Rationality was the one after that.
Well, then in between there was Enlightenment Now.
Enlightenment Now. Okay, yes.
So Better Angels Our Nature was on the history of violence, where I presented data that had been long on the decline. Then Enlightenment Now broadened that to other measures of human flourishing, like poverty, like democracy, longevity, education.
But each of them is excellent. The one of the things that stuck with me from Better Angels, you have this quote from the Georgian president Saakashvili after the short war with Russia in the 2000s, where he says, we could have put up an insurgency. We could have, gone up to the mountains and grown beards, but we decided not to do that. And I thought that was a very interesting. It kind of stayed with me because it was like I also read John Mueller's book. I think you've read it too, The Stupidity of War, and I've talked to John Mueller about it. And I think you're pretty close to him. It's like,
he was a huge influence on Better Angels Our Nature. He kind of guided me through a lot of the facts and arguments.
Yeah, and so I think where you guys converge is kind of ideas are really important. People just kind of realize that war, is stupid. I mean, he put that in the book title. But then I've been surprised actually the last 3 or 4 years because we've had two conflicts with massive death counts. And we're not talking about the heart of sub-Saharan Africa, which was always kind of a limit to these things. We're talking about the Gaza war and especially the Ukraine-Russia war. That surprised me a lot because you look at the casualty numbers. If Zelensky thought like Saakashvili did, they would have probably surrendered to the Russians, pretty early, and they would, not have had so many people killed, and the war would have been over. But here we are, we're 3.5 years into this war, and the casualty rates are kind of, they're very high. They're beyond what I would have thought possible. I mean, I think they're past 1 million on the Russian side, dead and wounded. They're in the hundreds of thousands, at least, on both sides. So, first of all, were you surprised by this? And does this shift your priors regarding like what's possible in the modern world? Yeah,
it did surprise me. It surprised Mueller, who right up until the invasion was quoting Chico Marx, "There ain't going to be no war."
Really? And, where was he doing? Was he on Twitter? Where was he doing this?
He really did privately. I don't know if I don't think he's on Twitter, but
maybe, better he's not on Twitter. People would be talking on that. Yeah.
But yeah, this really was a stunning breach of the norm since 1945 that borders are grandfathered in, nation states are immortal. And as a solution to a coordination problem calling for common knowledge, namely, the borders may be irrational. They may be all kinds of grounds for irredentist claims. Well, that patch of land that's on your side of the border, really historically and morally ought to be on our side of the border, which can lead to endless wars. Comes right out of what evolutionary biologists call a hawk-dove game, where you've got two animals that are fighting over, or at least competing over some resource, but sometimes the costs of actually fighting are greater than the value of what they're fighting over. So sometimes it's in both of their interests to want to just defer to the other, as long as there's some signal, some common knowledge that they can both be aware of, that they both settle on avoiding the conflict. And that often means the lower, the beta, ceding the resource to the alpha. And it can make sense if some things are not worth fighting over. And so the lines on the map, many of them completely irrational. A couple of colonial officers, after too much port, draw borders on a map, and so we got Iraq or Africa.
Right.
On the other hand, good fences make good neighbors, and however irrational, there they are. And if you just say the borders are the borders, then you avoid all the endless fighting and irredentist conflicts. And so that's likewise what is a nation state. If we no longer have the debate over whether Poland should continue to exist, then that's a formula for peace. Even if some countries like Pakistan don't make much sense,
Mm.
but there they are.
Yeah.
Let's live with them.
Yeah.
So by invading Ukraine with the intent actually of swallowing it up,
Yeah.
or even shifting the border,
Right.
that was a big breach of that norm.
Yeah. Although Crimea was the original.
Well, that's
step,
true. No,
right?
actually, you're right.
Yeah.
Crimea was the first.
Uh-huh.
And there, as what often happens with norms, if you can figure out some rationalization, well, it wasn't really a breach of the norm because Khrushchev just gave it to Ukraine
exactly.
in
Once you start,
1956.
that's the road to hell. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you can just kind of kick the can down the road a little bit by doing that. But although, as you point out, not in this case.
Yeah.
So it was surprising, given that it also gives the lie to a common understanding that nations go to war over resources.
Mm-hmm.
For Putin, it was very clear from the speech that he gave on the unity of the Russian Ukrainian peoples the summer before that he just had a historic vision of Russia's greatness and also rectifying the humiliation of the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything Ukraine had that he couldn't just buy. Without those million casualties, let alone the actual cost in rubles.
Yeah. I remember somebody saying there wasn't going to be a war before the conflict. They say, what are you going to do with Eastern Ukraine? Pay their pensions? I mean, it's a bunch of old people, right? I mean, it's the fertility rate. They have a demographic real problem in the country. And what do you want with these old, aging? It's that's kind of the idea that it's self-interested economic at the bottom is insane.
It truly is not. I think it is, pissing contests, rectifying historic humiliations, honor, glory, destiny, national greatness. And one of the reasons that Mueller wrote The Stupidity of War is that he thought, and there is some truth to it, people are just more interested in affluence, in bringing up their kids and comfort and
Although one strange aspect of this war. Actually, let me put it another way. Let me ask you this: has this kind of redeemed the neocons? Because I think if a neocon was reading this book, not the Iraq War and all that, but if a neocon was reading Better Angels of Our Nature 2011, he'd say, "Oh, this stuff about norms. This is very naive. This is American power. This is European power. These are we're lucky that the dominant military and economic force is Western civilization, and we need to maintain that, or else all this is going to break down."
I mean, I would move more in that direction than I did when writing Better Angels, where I think I would have not, if I made a bet, I would have bet and lost money that something like Russia invading Ukraine would not happen. Because it's just too stupid.
Yeah. Well,
people do stupid things.
Well, I thought it would happen. My prediction was it would happen and Ukraine would fold. Right. So I thought
that's true. There's another false prediction. I mean, it's not, when I say people are stupid, they're making a real moral judgment. As a psychologist, I can't just say, well, people are stupid, because I have to kind of find whatever hidden rationale there is.
Yeah.
And I think there is a rationale perversely applied in this case. In the kind of hawk dove case, you do establish in strutting and defending your honor and lashing out in response to insults that you aren't going to be pushed around. It's a way of establishing your position on the hierarchy. Now, in what modernity consists of, first within countries and then more tenuously globally, is that if you have some, rather than constant pissing contests, if you have some set of norms, of laws, and people call it the
rules-based international
rules-based international order, then it is better than constantly jockeying for status and power. And the rule of law within countries is what led to the decline of homicide over the centuries, sometimes called the civilizing process. We're kind of seeing that, and it's not dead yet, but the rules-based international order was an attempt to do the same thing, where the common knowledge solutions to problems, such as obey the lines on the map, was going to obviate the need for constant bullying and shoving. They were, to use a term that we haven't brought up in this conversation yet, Schelling points, named after the economist Thomas Schelling, namely something that is salient enough that it can generate common knowledge, even if there's no particular rhyme or reason for it, but the mere fact that both sides can point to it can be reason enough. So he gives the example of a couple separated in New York before cell phones. How do they find each other? He suggests, well, they might both might gravitate to the clock in Grand Central Station at noon.
Mm-hmm.
He called it a focal point, sometimes called a Schelling point.
Right.
Anyway, it just pops out enough that you can
Yeah.
kind of guess that the other person will guess that you'll guess that they'll guess that it'll commend itself as a solution.
Yeah.
And so the rules-based international order was partly Schelling points of nation states and borders.
Exactly. Yeah. I had the same reaction to Ukraine. I was wondering if you were in the same place. I guess maybe that's confirmation of Aumann's theorem. Both rational actors, we both updated in the same direction.
So the question is, norms like that, they can unravel if it becomes common knowledge that they can be flouted without penalty.
Yeah.
But sometimes, as with Crimea, they're unsuccessfully. But there are hypocrisies in everyday life that allow us to keep the equilibria of the relationships that we have, despite some violations, if the violations are not too blatant or if they're punished. So I give an example from Robin Hanson. Why don't police arrest a guy in the park who's drinking whiskey out of a bottle in a paper bag? Now, it's obvious he's not drinking, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Or why do they not shut down every escort service? They're not. Grown-ups know they're not selling escort time. And I think the answer is that systematic hypocrisy, rational hypocrisy, I call it, means that the police don't waste resources chasing down, every single, drunk in a park.
Yeah.
Maybe they should, but it's probably not cost effective. On the other hand, if it was common knowledge that you could flout the law without consequence, the law would have surrendered all its authority. So the fig leaf, the paper bag, the escort service, helps keep the norm that you don't break the law, despite the fact that it will inevitably be flouted. And so the thing is, will the invasion of Ukraine, now it's pretty blatant. It's not like drinking out of a paper bag.
Yeah.
But will it be such a disaster for Russia that other countries will think twice and they'll say, well, it's the exception that proves the rule. No wonder we had the rule against armed aggression. Look how badly it turned out for Russia.
Yeah.
Or not. Maybe that will embolden China to take over Taiwan once and for all.
Yeah. I remember, this reminds me of when Putin called it a special military operation. For some reason, they were, for a long time, maybe still, they wouldn't call it a war, which was just kind of, it became a punchline at some point.
Right, yes. So it is, unnerving would be an understatement. Even Trump's kind of trolling about taking over Canada and Greenland. Now, as with Trump, we don't know how serious to take this. You should take them, literally.
But the trolling itself, is harmful, I think, is what you're getting at.
So, exactly. Because it's some things that you don't joke about swallowing your neighbor. Because that weakens the norm that this is just something that decent countries don't do.
It kind of reminds me with the rise of the alt-right. People would say, oh, it's just trolling, it's harmless. But I think we learned it was like, no, actually, it was legitimizing certain ideas that were better, that were better not to be legitimized.
Well, it goes back to humor, making private knowledge common knowledge.
Right.
And sometimes you don't want things to be common knowledge, as with all the cases we've talked about of euphemism and innuendo.
Yeah, exactly. So last topic I wanted to ask you about, higher education. You wrote a great piece for the New York Times. I think a lot of people on the right, or a lot of people who are just dislike wokeness, they sit there, they see the universities as these kind of woke madrasas where they're like just teaching people to change their gender and to hate Western civilization. And like, there's some of that. There's some of this cultural, intellectual radicalism. But, you just listed, I don't know them off the top of my head, but like all these great scientific discoveries, all these things that people are doing, they're doing research on literature and ancient history, and they're doing, the hard sciences.
Oh, yes. And exoskeletons that paralyzed people can wear that allow them to, eat for themselves or clean themselves.
Yeah.
Research into antibiotic-resistant strains and what was a new generation of antibiotics that can still, when Cipro stops working and you get a UTI, what are you going to do then? Well, people at Harvard are trying to solve that problem. It's a big problem, and countless ones like that. So there are, sadly, my colleagues keep coming up with absurdities
Mm. Yeah.
that make it hard for people like me to credibly say
Mm.
most of what goes on at Harvard is
Yeah.
serious research.
Right.
But yeah, I think most of what goes on at Harvard is serious research, although the outrages
Mm.
get a lot of attention.
Mm. So is it possible? I mean, I'm kind of disturbed by how they've been bullying universities, and the fact that they're cutting back scientific funding or delaying its distribution, or making it kind of asking for budgets that cut research funding, federal research dollars. So all that is disturbing. But I do wonder sometimes, is there kind of a optimistic case for how this turns out? So you imagine the Trump administration comes in, it says get rid of the DEI office, have admissions based on objective criteria. I mean, they're going pretty detailed into this race and admission stuff. They're asking for average SAT score by race. They really want to audit the data and make sure that they're not getting around it, which they always tended to do, even when you would ban affirmative action. So is there an optimistic scenario? They do this stuff. The universities learn their lesson. Maybe the Trump administration cuts funding, but the next president restores funding, and the universities are less woke than they are, and maybe we get to a better equilibrium from that.
I think the package is not 100% bad things, but
Yeah.
it's still a bad package. So it's kind of in the category of Mussolini getting the trains to run on time.
Yeah.
It's good for the trains to run on time. That wasn't a good argument for Mussolini, because there are ways of getting the trains to run on time that don't involve fascism.
Yeah.
Likewise, there are some things that the administration is doing that just so go beyond both the letter of the law and norms of democratic governance. So the letter of the law, Harvard has sued the Trump administration, has won twice, and clearly has the law on its side. That a lot of the demands of the administration are violations of the First Amendment. In trying to coerce universities to have diversity of viewpoints according to their definition.
Sure.
That is a legal stipulation of what the viewpoint can be,
Yeah.
Which the First Amendment prohibits. Even though some of the penalties are simply withholding research funding rather than literally punishing the university, there is in the law constraints that governments can't dangle benefits to which people are entitled contingent on them.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. They're not behaving in accordance with the law.
But in addition, there are also norms like using just raw coercion, that is figuring out every way that the government may be legally entitled to cause pain, and forcing the university to do things that they want on pain of being shut down and crippled. And you just don't want a democratic government working that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think would have been okay. It would have been somewhat painful, but at least it would have been legal. Harvard almost certainly did flout the Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard Supreme Court decision in the year, and that was really bad of us. And so, if there was a legally specified punishment for flouting a particular law, I mean, that's what the rule of law is.
Yeah.
But if it's just let's figure out every way in which we can cripple Harvard until they dance to our tune, that's something you don't want to empower the government to be able to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think there's an aspect of they kind of want the battle. I mean, you hear one day like they'll be close to a negotiated settlement with Harvard, then the next day the administration will go do something else. And it's kind of like, people say Putin can't end the war in Ukraine. It's kind of like that. I mean, if Trump wins against Harvard, what does Trump have? I think this is kind of politically very useful for him.
Yeah, and I think the least bad outcome is that there is some kind of face-saving compromise, unjust and deplorable, but better than shutting down a massive research enterprise that benefits all of humanity.
Yeah.
So I think we could live with a fine, various other conditions. I liken it to if the mugger in an alley is pointing a gun at you, there is some wisdom in not being a hero, even though and handing over your wallet. And so that's really what's taking place now.
Yeah. And maybe, I guess the analogy here for me would be maybe it tells you not to go drunk wandering in these back alleys in the middle of the night, which I think the universities were doing by kind of, flouting these prohibitions on racial discrimination and stuff
they
like
were.
that.
Although, I think the demand that scores be publicly released, broken down by race, is probably making things more common knowledge-y than is optimal.
Yeah.
And my colleagues in quantitative social science say there are means of auditing that don't that are more subtle but as effective as forcing complete public disclosure. That if all they wanted to do is ensure compliance, there'd be much more subtle ways of doing it.
Yeah, I'm unsure if that's actually public disclosure or it's just disclosure towards the government that they're asking for. Yeah, I wonder about those methods though, because once you start getting it, like we've seen how clever the universities can be to get around. So I don't know. It'd be a trust issue.
And you're right that universities forfeited a fair amount of credibility in their finagling in the past.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I appreciate what you're doing. I mean, I tell people like Steve Pinker and like Larry Summers within these universities, they should be your allies, right? But the Trump administration has made it very, very difficult. And I mean, it's a great book. I recommend everyone read it. I recommend everyone go back. How many books have you written now?
This is the 12th.
Okay. I think I've read every single. There might be some obscure academic book.
You didn't read the first two, which were pretty technical.
Okay. I didn't read any technical books yet.
There's some technicalities in this one. I try to make them accessible. But you didn't read the first two, but the other ones I like to think are still relevant.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's been a pleasure.